She was just a soldier trying to buy cocoa for her 3 kids in the middle of a snowstorm until her card was declined. He was just a single dad, mopping floors at a roadside cafe until he quietly stepped forward and paid. Neither of them knew that moment would change their lives forever, because she wasn't just a soldier, and he wasn't just a janitor. Before we begin this unforgettable story of quiet bravery, healing, and love found in the most unexpected place, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Moments Story for more heartwarming tales that stay with you long after they end. Now, let's begin. Jackson Pines, Wyoming, Christmas Eve, 6:42 a.m. The bell over the door rang sharp and hollow, like a cracked wind chime in a blizzard. Everyone turned. She stepped inside in a gust of snow boots, caked in slush uniform, stiff with cold, and 3 small children huddled behind her like shadows. Their faces were pale cheeks, raw and red from the wind. Her breath came out in clouds, her eyes scanning the room, not with fear, but with the calm awareness of someone who'd assessed 1,000 rooms before this one. The cafe fell quiet. Only the hiss of the espresso machine and the buzz of a flickering neon sign filled the silence. The woman approached the counter slowly, her back still to the cold, her shoulders squared, like someone still carrying a weight she hadn't put down in years. 3 hot chocolates, she said to the teenage cashier, voice low-measured. And anything warm. The girl behind the counter looked at her, then at the kids. The oldest boy looked about 10, standing guard in front of the younger 2, a sleepy-eyed toddler, and a girl no older than 5 holding a tattered blanket. The cashier punched in the order. "That'll be $14.82. The woman pulled out a debit card from her jacket. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but fatigue. She slid the card across the counter. Declined. She tried again. The machine blinked. Declined. A 3rd time. Declined. Her jaw clenched. She gave a small nod, barely noticeable, then reached down and began rummaging through a worn canvas satchel, her military duffel, searching for crumpled bills, coins, anything. The toddler behind her began to cough. That was when he stepped forward. A man, tall, rugged, with long hair tucked beneath a beanie, wearing a weathered janitor's jacket dusted in snow. He moved without sound, the way only those trained to move that way ever do. And he didn't say much. He simply stepped up, reached across the counter, and placed a $20 bill beside the register. "Let me," he said. His voice was quiet but steady, the kind of voice that didn't ask permission. It just was. The woman turned to look at him, and for a moment, a fraction of a second, something passed between them. A flicker of recognition, not of the face, but the bearing. The way his shoulders squared, how his eyes scanned exits, how he placed himself between the kids and the door without even realizing it. Not a stranger. Not to her. She opened her mouth to protest. "Don't," he said softly. "Soldiers don't go hungry. Not on my watch." They sat in the corner booth, her children thawing slowly over cups of hot chocolate steam curling up like prayer. The man Gabe took the table next to them, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. He didn't ask questions. He just sat. The girl with the blanket stared at him for a long time before whispering. "Are you Santa Gabe?" chuckled. "No, sweetheart. Just someone who likes snow." The mother Harper hadn't spoken a word since he paid, but her eyes kept darting to him, not in fear or suspicion, but calculation. As if trying to place a rank without the uniform. He caught her glance. "You Army." She raised a brow, surprised. "You don't ask someone that at a diner in the middle of Wyoming?" "I don't. Unless I already know the answer." She held his gaze for a beat too long. Then, "And what were you?" Gabe's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I carried more than mops in a past life." When the kids finished their cocoa and her youngest had curled up under the table asleep, Harper stood and reached for her bag. "Thank you," she said. "For the coffee." "Where are you staying?" Gabe asked. She hesitated. "We're figuring it out." He nodded, took a sip of his coffee. Then quietly, "Storm's getting worse. That van outside's not going to keep the heat past sundown." She tensed. Her fingers gripped the strap of her duffel. "I've got a cabin," he said. "Just up the ridge. Wood stove. Extra blankets. My daughter and I live there. It's small. Safe." Harper narrowed her eyes. "And I'm supposed to just accept that offer from a stranger?" Gabe didn't blink. "No," he said. "You're supposed to make the call your gut tells you. Same as you always did. You've read people. You've survived worse. So you tell me, am I a threat or just a tired janitor trying to offer soup and shelter?" Harper didn't respond right away. She looked down at her kids. One of them was already nodding off, head against the booth. The other two barely keeping their eyes open. The wind outside howled like it wanted to eat the whole world. She sighed. "You got a fireplace," wood stove, Gabe said. "Big enough to cook on." A pause. "All right," she said. "But if you turn out to be a creep, you'll take me out with a fork and a shoelace." "Got it." He smiled, and for the first time, so did she. They walked out into the storm, kids bundled in borrowed scarves, Harper clutching her duffel, Gabe leading the way to his old pickup. As they disappeared into the snowfall, the bell above the cafe door rang again. Then silence. Inside the coffee machine, hissed one last time and stopped. Cold. The drive up the ridge was treacherous. Snow blanketed everything. Road signs disappeared. Fences vanished. Even the telephone poles looked like faint ghosts in the distance. Gabe's truck grumbled and rattled as it climbed slowly up the hill, its tires crunching over frozen gravel and hidden ice. Inside the cab, the heater blasted at full strength, but the silence was colder than the wind. Harper sat in the passenger seat, her arms folded tightly across her chest, not for warmth, but instinct. She didn't trust easily. She had 3 children in the back seat of a stranger's truck, and the only thing louder than the storm outside was the voice in her head telling her to be ready, always ready. Gabe kept his hands on the wheel, eyes forward. He didn't try to make conversation. He knew that silence sometimes meant safety. He had once driven through nights darker than this with teammates bleeding in the back, and silence as the only shield between life and death. But still he spoke eventually, quietly, calmly. "You never said your name." "Didn't have to," Harper replied. He gave the smallest nod. "Fair. A beat?" "Then it's Harper." "Harper Quinn." He smiled, still facing the road. "Gabe Holloway." The 5-year-old behind them yawned and asked, "Are we going to live in a snow house?" Harper glanced back and gave her a gentle look. "Just for a little while, baby, until we figure things out." Gabe chuckled. "Well, it's not made of snow, but it does creak like an old ship in the wind. So, close enough." 15 minutes later, the truck crested a final hill and pulled up in front of a small wooden cabin. Warm light spilled from the windows, casting a soft glow onto the snowdrifts surrounding it. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, disappearing into the white sky. A little girl with long auburn hair and mismatched socks opened the door before they could knock. "Dad," she called. Gabe grinned. "Hey, June, we've got guests." June stared at Harper, and the 3 kids like they were characters from a storybook, stunned, fascinated, and a little unsure. Harper stepped forward, the kids close behind her. June looked up at her dad. "Can they stay for Christmas?" Harper's eyes flicked toward Gabe. "I mean," June added quickly, "if that's okay." Harper opened her mouth, closed it, then knelt to meet June's gaze. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "June Holloway." "June," Harper said softly, "my kids are tired, cold, and a little scared. But if you're willing to share your roof with us, even just for tonight. I promise we'll do our best, not to be too much trouble." June nodded solemnly, then turned and waved them in. "We have soup." The cabin was smaller than Harper expected, but warmer. Real warmth, not just from the wood stove, but in the smell of cedar and fresh bread in the soft throws tossed over worn furniture, and the row of snow boots lined carefully by the door. Gabe handed her a pair of wool socks. "You'll want these." Floors cold. Harper took them, unsure how to respond. It had been a long time since anyone offered her something without expecting anything in return. She helped her kids get settled near the fire, where June was already explaining which mugs were the warmest and how to make the marshmallows stretch across 2 cups. Gabe poured soup into mismatched bowls and handed one to Harper. Their fingers brushed. She paused, looked at him. "I still don't understand why you did it." He shrugged. "Because someone should have." That simple no. His voice turned quiet. Not simple. Just overdue. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep in a nest of quilts and pillows, Harper stood on the porch, alone, arms folded, eyes on the snow-covered trees. The wind had quieted, and the world felt still too still. Gabe joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. Mint or chamomile? She gave him a look. "Right. You strike me as a black coffee at midnight kind of person." Harper smirked. "Only on deployments." He handed her the tea anyway. She took it. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching their breath curl into the dark. Then Harper asked, "Did you know back at the cafe?" "That I was military?" Gabe didn't hesitate. "Yeah." She nodded. "Thought so." "And you knew I was too," he added. "Of course," she said. "You cleared the doorway with your shoulder, scanned the exits, and didn't touch your coffee until you had full sight of the room." He chuckled. "It's hell trying to unlearn it, isn't it? No one ever really does." A pause. Then Harper turned to him, eyes softer than before. "I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't plan to land in a snowstorm in the middle of nowhere with 3 kids and an empty bank account." Gabe met her eyes. "Some of the best missions I ever had started the same way. No plan, just instinct." Harper looked down into her cup. "Instinct's the only thing I've got left." "No," Gabe said gently. "You've got 3 kids who still look at you like you hang the moon. That's more than instinct. That's love. That's leadership." Her eyes flickered. He added more quietly, "And if I've learned anything, it's that the world's cold enough already. We don't need to make it colder by pretending we're not worth saving." Harper blinked fast. She took a long sip of tea. Then the smallest smile. "You were a ranger, weren't you?" Gabe raised an eyebrow. "You can tell from how I stir soup." "No," she said, "from how you gave me orders without making it feel like orders." He laughed a full sound this time. "Guilty." Harper looked out into the dark, then back at him. "Thanks. For today. For everything." He nodded. "You're safe here." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Harper believed it. Morning came without sunlight. It was the kind of winter dawn where the sky couldn't decide between snow or fog, so it settled on both. Outside the cabin, the world was a soft blur of white quiet, and still, except for the low hum of life beginning again inside. Gabe moved silently through the kitchen, barefoot on cold wood, his breath faintly visible in the colder corners of the room. The coffee was already brewing. The scent of it drifted through the cabin like a welcome home flag. Harper sat at the small table, elbows on the worn oak, a wool blanket around her shoulders. She looked like she hadn't slept, or like she always looked that way. Gabe couldn't tell yet. 3 children still asleep were bundled together on the couch beneath patchwork quilts. June had claimed the armchair, and was already reading a tattered book about wolves in Alaska. It was quiet, but not awkward. Not empty. It was the kind of quiet that existed between people who understood noise and didn't need it. Gabe slid a mug toward Harper without speaking. She took it with a nod. No thanks. No smile. Just a flicker of acknowledgement. And somehow, that meant more. You keep the place too neat for someone who lives alone with a kid, Harper said finally. He didn't look up from the eggs he was cracking. Old habit. Makes it easier to find what matters. She sipped the coffee watching him. Still fold your socks military style, too. He glanced at her. You checked the sock drawer. I check everything she said. It's what I do. He smiled faintly. I liked that better when I didn't know. An hour later, the cabin had turned into a makeshift base camp. The kids had discovered Gabe's stash of board games and were halfway into an aggressive round of Scrabble. June was coaching the youngest Daisy on how to spell banana, while the eldest boy, Owen, tried to argue that blizzarding was a real word. Harper sat with a pencil and a blank page sketching something not art, but formation grids, block outlines, fallback plans. She didn't seem to realize she was doing it until Gabe leaned over her shoulder. You always draw battle layouts at breakfast. Harper blinked, startled, then smirked. Force of habit. Helps me think. Think about what? How to stay ahead of the next wrong move. She paused, then added quieter. I made too many of those when I had a uniform. I don't want to make more now. Gabe didn't push. Instead, he sat across from her and pulled out his own pad. Within seconds, he began sketching a different version of the same formation, flipping flanks, shifting supply routes. Harper looked up, brow raised. Triangle suppression instead of rear shield. Only if you want flexibility, Gabe said. Otherwise, you're trapped by your own defense. They held each other's gaze for a moment. Then in unison, they both nodded. June peeked over the back of the couch. Are you guys doing battle math again? Harper laughed softly, a sound no one had heard from her yet. No, sweetie, we're just speaking the same language. Later that day, Gabe and Harper stood outside chopping firewood while the kids played nearby. The air was brisk, the kind that woke you up from the inside. Harper's sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms laced with faint scars and stronger lines, evidence of both war and resilience. You teach your daughter how to shoot? Harper asked. Gabe paused. No. But I taught her how to listen, how to read a map, how to make a decision without freezing. That's rarer than most, think Harper said, driving the axe down clean. A beat passed. Then Gabe asked, Do you miss it? The army, he nodded. Harper exhaled long and slow. I miss the clarity. The mission, the rules, even if they changed without warning. I don't miss the silence that came after a bad call. Gabe was quiet. Then you were a field commander. She stopped mid-swing. Thought you didn't ask questions, she said, wiping sweat from her brow. I didn't ask. Gabe said. I just know. The way you move, the way you observe. You're not just a soldier. You led. Harper looked away, jaw tight. I don't want to talk about that part of my life. You don't have to, he said. But if you ever do, I'll understand it in ways most won't. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the snow had started falling again, Harper stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the wind erase the world outside. Gabe brought her a cup of hot cider. She took it silently. You know, she said, finally, for years I told myself I'd never need help. I'd be the one protecting everyone else. You still are, Gabe said. No, she said, voice firmer now. Not when I can't even afford a motel room and I'm sleeping under someone else's roof. He looked at her. Really, looked at her. Harper. You're not a burden. You're not weak. You're human. And you've carried so much for so long you forgot what it feels like to be carried. A pause. And for the record, he added, this roof. You earned it the moment you walked in with your head high and your kids fed last. Harper swallowed hard. Something about his words, simple, unpolished, hit her deeper than she expected. She looked down at the cider in her hands, then back up at him. Thank you, she said quietly, for not making me feel less. Gabe smiled. You're more Harper. You just forgot. They stood there, not speaking, while snow fell in thick curtains outside the glass. Some silences didn't need to be filled. Some were enough to heal. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the cabin like a lullaby. It had been 4 days since Harper and the kids had arrived. 4 days since a stranger paid for hot chocolate and offered them a cabin in the snow. 4 days since Harper had allowed herself to rest, not just her body, but her guard. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire crackled gently as Gabe stirred a pot of soup, methodical and quiet. He moved like a man trained to watch every detail, but no longer in a combat zone. In this kitchen, he watched for different things: a boiling edge, the flicker of flame, the shifting weight of someone's mood. Harper sat at the kitchen table, her youngest child curled asleep in her lap. She was reading silently, or pretending to, but every few minutes her eyes drifted back to Gabe. It was hard not to look. He wasn't handsome in a Hollywood way, too rugged, too real. There were lines around his eyes that came from things other than laughter. His hands were rough. His presence was steady. And without asking, he made space for her space. For her children. Space for silence to feel safe. You're a strange man, Gabe Holloway, she said. Finally, her voice low. Gabe glanced over his shoulder. Strange how you cook like a professional, walk like a soldier, and talk like a therapist. He smiled faintly, returning to the stove. Maybe I'm just a tired man with a good memory. A memory of what? He hesitated, then said, of how it feels when no one sees you. The words landed heavier than she expected. Harper looked down at her child fingers, absently stroking the girl's hair. Then quietly, as if the words had been waiting years to surface. My husband died overseas. I told myself I wouldn't fall apart, and I didn't. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to breathe without checking for crossfire. Gabe turned off the stove and faced her. His expression didn't change, no pity, no performance, just quiet understanding. That's because the war doesn't always end when the mission does. She met his eyes. For a long moment they said nothing. Then Harper shifted her daughter gently into the nest of blankets by the hearth and stood. Without a word, she rolled up the sleeve of her shirt and extended her left forearm. There beneath pale skin was a scar, long, jagged, puckered at the edges. It wasn't a clean wound. It was a story written in flesh. Gabe didn't flinch. He stepped closer and gently brushed his fingers just beside it, not touching the scar itself, but honoring it like a relic. What was it, he asked. Explosion. Improvised device, Southern Kandahar. It should have killed me. But it didn't. No, she said, it just rewired me. She rolled her sleeve back down, slow and precise, then lifted her eyes to his. You have one too. I can see it in your posture. Gabe's mouth twitched. Wear your silence. That evening after dinner and bedtime stories and whispered goodnights, Gabe found Harper outside again. She stood beneath the eaves, arms crossed, watching the sky. There were no stars, only the quiet hush of snow. You always sleep this light? She asked without looking at him. He joined her hands in his pockets. Rangers aren't trained to sleep deep. That must be exhausting. Only when I want to dream. Harper glanced sideways at him. You regret leaving the army? She nodded. Gabe thought for a moment. No, he said. I regret the reason I left. He didn't explain, not yet. But Harper didn't press. She knew the difference between silence born of shame and silence born of mourning. So instead, she offered her own truth. I left after I disobeyed a direct order. Not out of defiance, out of conscience. I couldn't watch civilians die because someone wanted a faster exit strategy. So I changed the call, got reprimanded. But we saved 50 lives, and they let you walk. Technically, they encouraged me to resign. Privately, they called me a liability. Gabe let out a low whistle. So you were the kind of officer I would have followed. Harper looked at him. Really looked. Not as a fellow soldier, not even as a man, but as something rarer. Someone who saw her. Most people either pity me or put me on a pedestal, she said. You do neither. That's because you're not broken, Harper. You're forged. She smiled, slow and genuine, and something about that smile shifted the night. It was like watching frost melt. They went back inside. The cabin was dim, lit only by the soft flicker of the fire and the faint hum of the wind outside. Gabe pulled a blanket off the couch and handed it to her. You don't have to sleep on the floor. I've slept in foxholes. Your couch is luxury. He hesitated, then asked, What do your kids think is happening right now? Harper tilted her head. You mean why we're here? Yeah, she considered. I think they believe this is an adventure, a secret mission. They don't know we're running on fumes. Gabe nodded slowly. Then let's give them that he said. Let them believe this is a story they'll tell one day about how a snowstorm led them to a cabin where the soup never ran out and the fire never went out, and they were never scared. Harper swallowed the knot in her throat. Why are you doing this, Gabe? He paused, then said, With no performance, no flourish, just truth, because I see a good woman trying to carry the whole damn world, and I've seen too many good ones fall from the weight. Harper stared at him for a long moment. Then she whispered, Don't make me believe in people again, Gabe Holloway. But he didn't say anything, because maybe she already had. The snow eased the next morning, but the sky remained bruised with winter. Light filtered through the frost-glazed windows like a memory of sunshine, not the real thing. Harper stood in the cabin's small laundry nook, carefully folding towels that didn't belong to her. She wasn't used to stillness. Even in sleep, her body stayed alert, always half ready for orders that no longer came. Behind her, Daisy giggled as she and June built a fortress of pillows near the hearth. Owen was drawing what looked like a tactical map on the back of an old cereal box. Harper didn't correct him. The lines were straight, precise. He had a mind for strategy, just like his father. Just like her, Gabe was in the crawl space. The heater had been acting up a soft, irregular rattle that bothered him more than it probably should. It wasn't about the sound. It was about control reliability. If something could break, he needed to understand why. With a wrench in hand, he maneuvered under the old floorboards. The scent of dust and cold wood surrounded him. He shifted a panel aside and saw the loose duct. But he also saw something else. A steel box. Flat. Military issue, tucked behind the joist. He reached for it instinctively, fingers brushing the cold metal. It was locked, but not heavily, just clipped shut, like it hadn't expected to be found by anyone who didn't already know it was there. Gabe hesitated. He hadn't meant to find this. He hadn't been looking. But something about the weight of the box in his hands felt personal, felt like truth. He waited until nightfall, until the children were asleep, the house quiet again, until Harper had returned from her walk around the property, a habit she didn't talk about, but he understood perimeter check. Reflex. She entered through the back door, shaking snow from her coat. He was standing by the fire, and the box was on the table. She stopped in her tracks. There was no need to ask how he'd found it, only what he'd done with it. I haven't opened it, he said quietly. Harper stepped forward slowly, not angry, just measured. That's not just a box, Gabe. I know. It's my past. My entire past. I figured. A long silence passed between them. Then she reached out, undid the clips, and opened it. Inside were worn documents, folded field maps, a medal in its case, the Silver Star, and a plastic ID badge with her face sharper than, and words printed in stark black magi. Jenner Harper Quinn, U.S. Field Command. Gabe let out a low breath. Not surprise, just confirmation. You were a general. Still am, she said softly. Technically. But I haven't worn that title in 2 years. She picked up the ID, turned it over in her fingers. This was from the Phoenix deployment, she said. We were pulling out a team from Aleppo civilians trapped between factions. Intel was a mess. Politics worse. I was given a fallback order, but I disobeyed it. Moved forward instead. Got our people out. Saved 78 lives. Gabe nodded slowly. And paid for it. I was offered a desk, a demotion, or early resignation. They were polite, diplomatic. But the message was clear. Don't make waves. She put the ID back in the box. I left, she said. Not because I was broken, but because I couldn't trust the rules anymore. Gabe sat down across from her, his eyes steady. I left after my brother died, he said. Harper looked up. We were on recon near Kandahar. Intel said the valley was clear. We moved in 3 men. It was an ambush. He died shielding me. His jaw tightened. Turns out the order to go in had been based on satellite footage. 12 hours old. They knew the risk. They sent us anyway. Harper's voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry, Gabe. He nodded once. After that, I couldn't carry the flag without feeling like I was carrying a lie. Their pain different, but carved from the same stone hung between them. And then quietly, Harper closed the box. I never meant to hide it from you, she said. But I needed to be a mom, just a mom, not a general, not a symbol. You don't owe me an explanation, Gabe said. But for what it's worth, I think you were trying to survive the only way you knew how. She gave him a look, not defensive, not guarded, but grateful. Later that night, Gabe tucked June into bed. She clutched a drawing she'd made Harper and her kids in front of the cabin, smiling, the snow falling around them like glitter. She's nice, June whispered. Yeah, Gabe said, brushing hair from her forehead. She is. Are they gonna stay? Gabe hesitated. I don't know, he said honestly. Can we ask them to? He smiled, kissed her forehead and whispered, Sleep first. We'll talk about it tomorrow. In the living room, Harper sat alone, staring at the fire. Gabe joined her, handing her a mug of cocoa without asking. For a while they didn't speak. Then Harper murmured, You ever feel like the more you try to forget your past, the more it finds its way back through the cracks? All the time, Gabe said. But maybe it's not about forgetting. Maybe it's about deciding what part of it comes with you. She turned to look at him. And what if you don't know which parts are worth keeping? He shrugged. Then maybe you let someone else help you choose. She held his gaze, and in it was something fragile, something real, the weight of 2 lives that had survived too much and hoped too little. You're not like anyone I've ever met, she said quietly. He smiled. That's because most people you've met were wearing armor. A pause. So were you, she added. I still am, he replied. But maybe just, maybe. I don't need it as much anymore. Outside, the snow began falling again, soft, unhurried, like the sky was trying to give them a clean page. The storm lifted by morning. Trees shimmered with a dusting of fresh snow, and the cabin's tin roof sighed softly as the weight eased off. The whole world looked rinsed, like the night had wiped it clean. But peace, Harper knew, rarely lasted long. She was in the kitchen pouring cereal into mismatched bowls for the kids when the voice from the old radio on the shelf caught her attention. And in national news this morning, new details emerge surrounding the sudden disappearance of decorated Field General Harper Quinn. The bowl in her hand stopped halfway. Milk sloshed over the side and onto the counter. Once celebrated for her command of the Phoenix deployment in Syria, General Quinn's departure from the U.S. Army 2 years ago had raised questions. This week, however, sources inside the Pentagon have confirmed an effort to locate her for potential reinstatement in light of new international developments. June looked up from the floor where she and Owen were sorting puzzle pieces. "Miss Harper, that's your name." Harper moved too quickly, and clicked the radio off. Owen furrowed his brows. "You were on the news." "It's an old story," she said, forcing a calmness into her voice. "Nothing important." But the words sat heavy in the room. Kids notice more than adults think, and silence tells more truth than explanation ever could. Gabe returned mid-morning with a bundle of firewood in his arms. Snow clung to his boots, and his hair was wet with sleet. He set the logs down, brushed off his coat, and looked at Harper. Her eyes met his, and he knew. "You heard," she said. "I heard." He didn't ask why her photo had just aired on national radio. He didn't ask how much trouble might follow. Instead, he asked, "Do they know where you are?" "Not yet," he nodded. "But they're looking." Harper leaned against the counter. "They want me back, not because they believe in me, because they're desperate." Gabe moved closer, speaking low. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, then took a breath. "There's a situation. East Africa. Humanitarian corridors collapsing. Rogue elements getting control of supply lines. They need someone with my field record. Someone who's handled chaos without getting swallowed by it." She didn't say the rest. "They need someone expendable." "I thought you were done," Gabe said gently. "So did I." Later that day, Gabe found her outside splitting firewood, hard rhythmic swings, like she was cutting through more than just timber. "You okay?" he asked. She paused, sweat glistening along her brow despite the cold. "I'm trying to remember what it felt like to choose something because it was right, not because it was expected." Gabe crossed his arms. "And it's harder than it used to be." They stood in silence. Then Gabe said, "If you go back, it won't be like last time." Harper glanced at him. No. This time, you're not alone. You've got 3 kids who need their mom, not a medal. You've got a girl who asked this morning if you'd be her teacher forever. And you've got a man who doesn't want to watch you walk out of his life." Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders softened. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," he said. "But the hardest missions always start with one question." She looked at him, waiting. "Do you believe the fight still needs you, or is it time to start fighting for yourself?" That evening, Harper sat on the edge of her borrowed bed, the steel box open on her lap. She pulled out the metal. It was heavier than she remembered. In the quiet, Daisy climbed up beside her, blanket in hand. "What's that?" the little girl asked. Harper studied the silver star. Its surface scratched, the ribbon faded. "It's something they give you when you do something brave." "Did you save people?" "Yes, baby," Harper said softly. "I did." Daisy leaned her head on her mother's arm. "Do you have to go save more people now?" Harper froze. She looked down at her daughter's small face, trusting, tired, believing in a world she hadn't yet learned to fear. "No," Harper said. "Why not?" "Because the bravest thing I can do right now is stay." Daisy didn't understand the weight of that answer, but she smiled and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. "That's good," she said. "I like this house. It smells like bread." Harper laughed through the tears in her throat. Gabe was waiting for her by the fire. She walked in holding the medal and sat beside him. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, "They offered me reinstatement. Immediate deployment. I could leave next week. Gabe didn't flinch, and Harper opened her hand, showing him the medal. I'm not going. A slow exhale escaped him, like he hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. I can't keep trying to serve the world, she continued, and keep coming home to children I don't recognize anymore. They deserve me. Fully. Not the scraps of what's left after another battlefield. Gabe reached out, took the medal from her palm, and gently set it on the mantel. Then leave it there, he said. Let it be what it was, not what you still owe. She looked at him, at the man who once wore a different kind of uniform, who knew pain, knew loss, but still stood here, offering her something stronger than duty. A chance. Later that night, June tiptoed into the living room where her father sat with a cup of tea. Dadya, sweetheart. She hesitated. Is she staying? Gabe looked toward the hallway where Harper had just tucked her kids in. Then he smiled. I think she's finally home. The snow had stopped. For the first time in weeks, the sky over Jackson Pines was clear, brushed in soft blues and pale pinks, like someone had smoothed out the wrinkles of the world. The town below, barely more than a collection of rooftops and steeples, looked like a forgotten toy village, quiet, gentle, still breathing under a blanket of frost. Inside the cabin, the mood didn't match the weather. Gabe knew something had shifted the moment he walked in. The wood stove was still glowing. The kids were playing. June was laughing. But Harper wasn't there. Not in the kitchen. Not in the hallway. Not outside. His gut tightened. Then he saw a folded envelope on the kitchen table, propped against a coffee mug. His coffee mug. His name was written across it in clean, steady handwriting. Gabe. He stood still for a moment, staring at it, as if it might change what was inside, if he just waited long enough. Then he opened it. Gabe, I thought maybe if I said it out loud I'd break. And I can't afford to break, not now. Not with 3 children looking up at me like I still know what I'm doing. You gave me something I didn't know I needed: room to be human again. But the truth is, I'm not just a mother or a soldier. I'm still trying to figure out who I am when I'm not either. I've been defined by duty for so long, I forgot what it means to choose something, just because it feels right. That night, by the fire, when you said, maybe it's time to fight for yourself, I wanted to believe it. I did. But I need time to figure out how to stop surviving and start living. I've never stayed anywhere long enough to plant roots. And maybe that's my problem. I hope you understand. Thank you for the soup, the silence, the space. Tell June I loved her drawings. Tell your heart I didn't mean to run. I just needed to breathe on my own. Harper. He read it twice, then folded it slowly, placing it back into the envelope like a man handling glass. She hadn't taken much. Just her duffel, her children, and a jar of the apple preserves June had given her, for energy on the road. She didn't owe him anything more, but still the cabin felt quieter, like something had been unplugged from the wall. Not broken, just absent. 2 days passed. June asked questions, but not the kind that demanded answers. Did they have to go? She asked over breakfast. Gabe stirred his oatmeal. Yeah, for now. Are they safe? I think so. She nodded solemnly. Okay. He marveled at how easily children accept heartbreak when it's wrapped in honesty. But the truth was, he missed them. He missed the sound of Daisy's tiny footsteps on the floorboards in the morning, the way Owen lined up cans in tactical formations near the pantry, the soft scratch of Harper's pencil on notebook paper in the quiet hours after the kids fell asleep. He missed her voice, even when she said nothing at all. 3 weeks later, the snow began to melt. Icicles dripped from the roof in slow, steady rhythms. Birds returned to the trees. The air no longer bit through wool and skin. And Gabe, despite himself, started clearing space. He moved a second bookshelf into the living room. He carved a new wooden step for the porch, one wide enough for small feet to sit on during summer nights. He bought an extra pillow, not because he expected anything, just in case. Then, one Friday morning, the mail came late. Soggy and mostly junk, except for a thick envelope from Washington, D.C., addressed to Harper Quinn. He didn't open it. He placed it on the mantel beside the steel box she had left behind untouched since the night she showed him the scars that matched his own. He stared at the envelope for a long time, then said aloud quietly, "Whatever you decide, make it yours." The next night, Gabe stood on the porch after dinner, coffee in hand, watching the trees sway gently under a pale moon. He didn't hear the car at first, but June did. She ran past him with her socks slipping on the floor, flung open the door, and froze. A familiar SUV was pulling into the snowy driveway. Lights off, engine quiet. It stopped, and the doors opened. 3 kids piled out, first laughing, bundled in new coats. Harper stepped out last. No uniform, no steel in her spine. Just Harper. Worn boots, soft eyes, and a tired kind of peace on her face that hadn't been there before. Gabe didn't speak. He just walked down the steps, coffee mug still in hand, and met her halfway. She smiled, hesitant, hopeful. "I wasn't sure if I should come back," she said. He looked at her for a long time. "You were never supposed to leave." She exhaled, not sharply, not painfully, just like someone letting go of something they'd held too tight for too long. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "You don't have to," Gabe said. "You just have to stay long enough to find out." And she did something she hadn't done since Kandahar. She nodded and stayed. The days began to stretch longer. Snowdrifts receded into puddles. The morning frost turned to dew. And in the quiet thaw of early spring, the cabin didn't just hold heat, it held life again. Gabe wasn't sure exactly when it started to feel normal. Maybe it was the way Harper always made 2 cups of coffee without asking, or how Daisy hummed the same tune every morning when she tied her boots. Or maybe it was the moment June handed Harper a crayon drawing of them all at the dinner table and simply labeled it home. Whatever it was, it felt earned. Uneven, maybe, but real. But even peace has its ghosts. And Harper's came by mail. The envelope was still on the mantel, unopened, thick. Government issue, addressed to her in crisp official lettering. It had sat there for over a week, like a quiet dare. Gabe had left it untouched, but he saw Harper glance at it sometimes, while folding blankets, while helping the kids with schoolwork, while sipping her coffee on the porch. She never reached for it, until she did. It was a Thursday afternoon. The kids were outside building something that looked vaguely like a ship made of sticks and snow mud. Gabe was fixing the chicken wire fence by the shed when he saw her standing by the hearth, envelope in hand. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she turned it over slowly, running her thumb along the edge, as if trying to read the weight of its contents through touch alone. Then, without drama, without hesitation, she tore it open. Gabe didn't watch. He just kept hammering in silence, waiting for her to come to him. She didn't. Not that day. Not the next. Harper hadn't spoken a word about the letter for 3 days, but her energy shifted. Not tense, just distant, like she was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. That Sunday, Gabe found her at the lake. It wasn't much, just a still body of water surrounded by pines, hidden a few minutes down the trail from the cabin. It was the place he went when he needed quiet that didn't come with walls. She was sitting on a fallen log jacket, zipped collar, up hands deep in her pockets. He didn't say anything as he sat beside her. They listened to the water lap gently at the shore. Finally, she spoke. "They offered me a role." Gabe nodded slowly. "Overseas?" he asked. "No. Here. Domestic operations. Strategic command. No combat, no deployments." He waited. "I could do it from D.C., she said. Office hours. Intel analysis. Training development. No field risk. Full benefits. Sounds like a dream offer, he said. Sounds like they're trying to keep me quiet by giving me a desk and a badge. He glanced at her, then back at the lake. Would it make you happy? She didn't answer right away. I used to think I only had value if I was in the middle of the fire, she said. But then I came here, and I saw my kids laugh again. I saw them sleep without flinching in the night. She looked at him. I saw you, the way you rebuilt your life from the ashes, not by pretending it didn't burn, but by planting something in the soil anyway. Gabe's throat tightened. Harper. She shook her head. I'm not going back. I read every word of that letter, every clause, every promise, and I realized it wasn't offering me a mission. It was offering me a leash. She pulled a smaller envelope from her pocket, addressed in her handwriting. I wrote my response this morning. Gabe didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. That night, Harper tucked the kids into bed, kissed their foreheads, and sat by the fire with Gabe. They didn't talk about decisions or deployments. They talked about chickens. Harper wanted 3. Gabe suggested 4 just to hedge their bets. They argued over names. Then she laughed a deep, unguarded laugh and leaned her head against his shoulder. You know what scares me, she said quietly. Tell me. I'm not used to peace. I keep waiting for something to explode. He wrapped an arm around her, steady and strong. Maybe the explosion already happened, he said. Maybe this is just the part where we rebuild. She closed her eyes. Rebuilding sounds a lot like falling in love. He smiled into her hair. That's because it is. The next morning they walked down to the post office together. It was a long walk, 3 miles each way. The kids stayed with June's aunt in town, and for once, Harper didn't bring her satchel, or her emergency maps, or her pocket knife. Just the envelope. And her choice. At the post office counter, Gabe waited a step behind, as Harper slid the letter across the wood. The clerk took it without comment. As they stepped back outside, sunlight filtered through the clouds, warm for the first time in months. Harper took a deep breath. Feels different, she said. Gabe looked at her. That's because it is. And she took his hand, not because she needed help walking, but because she finally understood what it meant to let someone walk beside her. The first day of real spring arrived not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of things returning to life. Snowmelt trickled down the ridge in narrow veins, feeding into the creek behind the cabin. Buds formed on the stubborn branches of the pines. Birds that had long fallen silent began calling to one another again. The earth, it seemed, had taken a breath and finally let it out. Inside the cabin, the same was happening. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, steadily. Gabe noticed it first in the little things. Harper had stopped checking the locks twice before bed. She no longer flinched at sudden noises, the slam of the screen door, the clang of a dropped pan. She smiled more. She teased June about her too serious bedtime routines. She let Owen teach Daisy how to make a compass from a magnet and a needle, and instead of correcting him, she just watched quietly. Proud. And Gabe, he let himself watch her, without guilt, without the fear of losing her at sunrise. One evening, while the kids played cards on the porch and the last light melted across the valley, Harper found Gabe in the shed behind the cabin, sorting through a box of old tools. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "What are you building?" He looked up, sheepish. "A chicken coop," she smirked. "So you settled on 4-3 and a rooster." June won the vote. Of course she did. He stepped aside so she could see the early structure, rough beams forming the frame, a few rusty nails still sticking out like afterthoughts. "It's not pretty," Gabe admitted. Harper walked up, ran her hand along the edge of the beam. "No," she said. "But it's strong." A pause. She looked up at him. You always do that. Do it, build things that hold people up. He chuckled, but she didn't. I mean it, Gabe. You gave me a place to remember who I was, and a space to imagine who I might still become. He set the hammer down and turned to face her. You didn't need a place, he said. You just needed a reason to stop running. Harper took a step closer. And you. I needed someone to remind me why I stopped fighting, and why I might start again. Their eyes locked, and in the space between them something quiet, something tender settled in. Not urgency, not passion, but recognition. He reached for her hand. She let him. It was the kind of touch that said, I'm here. I'm not leaving. You don't have to carry it alone. That night, Harper couldn't sleep. She lay in the small bedroom Gabe had cleared for her, and the kids staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind ease through the trees. So much had changed, yet she still felt like she stood on the edge of something she couldn't quite name. She got up quietly, wrapped herself in her coat, and stepped outside. To her surprise, Gabe was already on the porch, a cup of tea steaming in his hand. Couldn't sleep, he asked without looking up. Harper sat beside him. Didn't try hard. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Then she said almost to herself, I used to think stillness meant weakness. Gabe nodded, sipping his tea. Me too. I thought, if I wasn't moving, wasn't leading, wasn't solving, then I was wasting time. And now, she exhaled. Now I think stillness is a kind of bravery I never learned. Gabe turned to look at her. You've learned it now. I'm still learning, she admitted, but it doesn't scare me like it used to. He smiled. Progress. She leaned back in the chair, closed her eyes, and whispered, Do you ever think we were supposed to meet? Or was it just a lucky accident? He didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, he said, Maybe not all miracles arrive with fanfare. Some just show up cold and quiet, wearing a uniform and asking for cocoa. Harper laughed, not the polite kind, but the kind that cracked open a door inside her. She reached over and took his hand again. I think I'm finally starting to believe in miracles. Then you're exactly where you're meant to be. The next morning, Daisy came bouncing into the kitchen with a fistful of wildflowers' dirt still clinging to the stems. Miss Harper, she called out, can we plant these in the backyard? Harper bent down. You want to make a garden? Yes, Daisy grinned. A real one, with colors. Harper met Gabe's eyes across the room. He gave the faintest nod. And in that moment, Harper said, yes. Not just to the flowers, not just to the dirt, but to the life she hadn't dared let bloom until now. The garden began as a patch of stubborn soil behind the cabin, still half frozen in places and tangled with roots from the pines. It wasn't much, not flat, not perfect, but it was theirs. Harper stood beside Gabe that morning, a shovel in one hand, Daisy's bouquet in the other. The kids buzzed around them like worker bees planting sticks to mark their imaginary plots. Owen called his zone Defense Sector 1. June insisted on naming each plant like a soldier on deployment. Harper didn't argue. She was just glad they believed in something growing again. Later, as Gabe turned the earth, Harper worked in silence beside him, sleeves rolled up, sweat beating at her temple. There was something sacred about it, taking something untouched, unchosen, and shaping it with your hands. At one point, Gabe looked up and grinned. You sure you want to do this the old-fashioned way I dug trenches in southern Iraq? Harper replied. This is practically a spa day, he chuckled, driving his spade deeper into the soil. I keep forgetting how terrifyingly capable you are. She smirked. Don't forget. Just learn to respect it. He saluted, mock serious. Yes, ma'am. Their laughter carried across the field. That afternoon, while the kids napped and the garden sat resting beneath its first layer of turned soil, Harper opened the steel box again. It had sat untouched for weeks now, the contents untouched, her medals, her field notes, the insignia once pinned to her chest like armor. This time she didn't just look. She took everything out, one item at a time, spread it across the dining table like pieces of a life she no longer feared facing. Gabe found her there an hour later, standing over it all. She didn't look up. I kept it locked up like it was shame, she said softly. But it never was. It was just unfinished. He stepped forward quietly. I know. Harper picked up the ID badge. The photo, hard-eyed, stern, 5 years younger, stared back at her like someone she'd known but never truly liked. She was brave, Harper said. But she was tired. Gabe rested a hand gently on her shoulder, and she made it home. That night, Harper gathered the children in the living room. They circled around her as she knelt in front of the fireplace, the steel box open beside her. This, she said. Holding up the medal was given to me because I helped save a group of people who couldn't protect themselves. Owen leaned closer, eyes wide. Like superheroes, kind of, Harper said, smiling, but with more paperwork. She passed the medal to him. Go ahead. Hold it. Owen cradled it like treasure. Daisy climbed into her lap. June leaned against Gabe, listening. I used to think the only way to matter, Harper said, was to wear a uniform, to be in charge, to follow orders. But I've learned something different here. She looked at each child. I've learned that being brave doesn't always mean running into danger. Sometimes it means staying put, loving someone, starting over. Daisy tilted her head. So, are we staying forever? Harper paused, then smiled. As long as it takes to grow roots. After the kids went to bed, Gabe found her on the porch, staring up at the stars. He stepped up beside her, his voice low. You sure about all this? Harper nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time. I'm not afraid of staying. He was quiet, then said, I used to think coming home meant the end of something. Now, I think it means the start. She looked at him, eyes steady. It does. They stood there for a long while, the night holding them gently between breaths. Then she reached into her coat pocket and handed him something. It was her field badge. Gabe raised an eyebrow. What's this for? Harper smiled softly. A reminder. Of what? That even when we leave the field, the mission changes, but it never ends. And now Gabe asked. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Now the mission is love, and I'm finally ready to lead it. 2 weeks later, the garden bloomed. It wasn't spectacular. The lettuce grew crooked. The carrots refused to cooperate. The tomatoes were stubborn. But it was alive. And in the evenings, when the sun fell behind the trees and the air turned gold, Harper sat on the porch with Gabe. June curled against his side, Owen building wooden forts, Daisy chasing moths, and they watched the world settle into peace. No sirens, no orders, no broadcasts, just stillness, just home. The morning began with birdsong, not the shrill kind that came too early in spring, but the soft, rhythmic chatter of robins nesting nearby. Gabe stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, humming low under his breath, while the scent of maple syrup and browned butter drifted through the cabin. Harper appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wrapped in a flannel shirt that clearly wasn't hers. Her hair was loose, her face unpainted, but her eyes, they were bright. Brighter than he'd ever seen them. You're humming, she said, stepping into the kitchen. It's the maple syrup. It gets into my bloodstream. She smiled. Well, it's working. The kids are still asleep. Miracle. Or pancakes. He poured more batter onto the skillet. Either way, I'll take it. They ate breakfast on the porch. June curled in the corner with a book. Owen played with a slingshot he was building from elastic and a tree branch. Daisy fed breadcrumbs to a sparrow who refused to be intimidated by her size. The garden had begun to bud a little wild, a little uneven, but full of promise, just like everything else around here. Gabe handed Harper a cup of coffee and pointed toward the tree line. "I think we should build a bench out there," he said. "Under that elm." For what? For remembering, or dreaming, or just sitting in silence. She sipped the coffee and looked toward the spot. "Then let's build two. One for the days we sit together. One for the days we need to breathe apart." He didn't say anything, but he reached for her hand, and that was enough. Around noon, a letter arrived. Not from Washington, not from anyone official, just a scrawled envelope, no return address, postmarked from Utah. Harper opened it slowly, sitting by the window. Gabe watched her face carefully, not worried, but curious. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. Clean. General Quinn word travels. So does respect. I heard you turn down reinstatement. That decision carries more courage than any battlefield ever could. For what it's worth, I never forgot what you did for us in Syria. Neither did my brother. You saved more than lives that day. You saved what was left of our humanity. I hope you found a place worthy of you. Lieutenant David Monroe Rhett. Harper folded the letter gently, almost reverently. She didn't cry, but she closed her eyes and placed her palm over the folded page, as if trying to feel the weight of a truth she had long buried beneath duty. Gabe came to stand behind her. "You okay?" She nodded. "I think I am." That night, Gabe took her hand and led her to the hill above the cabin, where the grass was thickest and the wind softest. The stars spilled across the sky in great, quiet rivers of light. The moon hung low, like it wanted to listen. Harper sat in the grass, knees hugged to her chest. "It's strange," she said. The quiet used to feel like a threat. He lay down beside her, hands folded behind his head. And now, it feels like a promise. He turned to look at her, moonlight catching the curve of her jaw. "I have something for you," he said. "Oh." He sat up, pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a compass, old, weathered, clearly used. She opened it, and at first it seemed ordinary, until she saw the engraving on the back. "Mission Love," her throat caught. "You kept this," she whispered. "It was my father's. He gave it to me before I deployed. I carried it through Afghanistan, Iraq, Honduras, and home. It's always pointed me where I needed to go." And now Gabe leaned closer, his voice a whisper only she could hear. "Now it points to you." Harper blinked hard, laughter trembling beneath her tears. "That is," she started, voice cracking, "that is the cheesiest thing I've ever heard." He grinned. "And yet," she closed the compass, set it gently in her lap, "and yet it's the first thing anyone's ever given me that made me want to stay." He reached for her hand. She let him. Weeks passed. The garden thrived. Owen joined the town's scouting group. June got her first library card and started writing stories about time-traveling squirrels. Daisy adopted a one-eyed stray cat and named him Captain Pickles. Harper taught survival classes to local teens once a week. She started running again. Some mornings, she'd wake early, lace up her boots, and disappear into the woods, not to flee, but to breathe. Every evening she came back. One Sunday morning, as church bells rang softly in the distance, Harper stood at the edge of the porch and looked out over the land. Gabe came beside her. "You thinking about something?" he asked. She nodded. "About how long I thought I needed to prove I was unbreakable." And now she turned to him. "Now I know. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about who helps you up, and who waits beside you when you're ready to stand." He kissed her temple, then her lips, then her hand. And for the first time since the war, since the medals, Since the missions that nearly took her away, Harper Quinn allowed herself to believe in a future. Not just survival, but joy, love, roots. At sunset, they all sat by the fire pit out back. 5 people and 1 lazy cat, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky. Owen played harmonica. Daisy sang nonsense words. June sketched them all with crayons and stars. And Harper leaned into Gabe, whispered something soft. Something he didn't repeat. Because not everything needed to be said aloud to be real. Some things, the best things, are written in the quiet language between hearts. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you truly. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Leave us a comment and share a little piece of your world. It means more than you know. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to subscribe to Soul Moments Story for more true-to-life tales filled with kindness, resilience, and quiet miracles. From our hearts to yours, thank you for spending time with us. Until next time, take care, stay warm, and keep believing in the goodness of people.